streets protesting and complaining about the lack of access to economic prosperity, to the medical supplies they need, to a life they deserve to live. That can take on a range of meanings. There's a global pandemic right now. Most people in that country don't have access to vaccines. That certainly is something we'd love to help with.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki defending the administration's stance on what sparked the protest in Cuba. Joining us now to discuss, physician and Congressman Michael Burgess. He's a Republican from Texas joining us on the program. Congressman, good to see you this morning.
Great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's get to the bottom of it. There kind of seems to be a back and forth over what actually sparked the demonstrations in Cuba here. We've heard local media, in fact, reporting on the island, showing protesters demanding freedom, calling for an end to the country's communist dictatorship. Meantime, one NBC reporter, Andrea Mitchell, suggesting the pandemic and the previous administration's policies played a role in sparking the protest. She posted this on Twitter. I'll show you the tweet here, if we could pull it up. Historic protests in Cuba over the weekend sparked by economic downturn under Trump sanctions, exacerbated by pandemic tourist losses and spikes in COVID cases with lack of approved vaccines. Regime blames U.S. sanctions. Biden stands with protesters here. Congressman, what do you believe is sparking these protests we're seeing?
Well, look, first off, the sanctions have been in place through multiple administrations, and OFAC from the Department of Treasury has really placed those restrictions in place. The Cuban people are suffering because their government does not want to help them, and that is the sad reality. I've actually been to Cuba myself a couple of times, once on a medical trip, and then once with a group of congressmen looking at medical facilities in Cuba. I will tell you that it is so discouraging when you visit that island, because it is truly a tropical paradise, but the government has literally ground those poor people. It continued to repress them for decades, and it is so sad. One Cuban showed me his ration book, and can you imagine living with a ration book? Your government sends you a ration book. This is how much rice. This is how many slices of bread you're going to get this month. Who wants to live like that? These brave people that are out there protesting, good for them. And you know what? It was kind of interesting to see a couple of American flags in your footage that you played.
I noticed that as well. We see these protesters waving the American flag, shouting out for freedom. The president did issue a statement saying that he stands with the Cuban people and their right to protest. He called out Cuba's authoritarian regime, but he did not mention communism or the communist regime directly. I know some critics were quick to point that out, potentially as a missed opportunity. Congressman, while you're with us on the program, I've got to talk to you about some news coming out of your state as well. We saw Democratic lawmakers, state lawmakers, leaving the state, avoiding the governor's special session. This all has to do with voting reform and changes coming to the state's election laws. Talk to me about the move from Democrats. Do you think it was a positive move that we saw from these state lawmakers?
No, you're elected to do a job, and you should show up to work to do your job. Otherwise, why did you run for office? Look, in the United States House of Representatives, I'm in the minority party. I understand how frustrating that is. I understand how many days you're going to wake up and go to work and lose the vote. But at the same time, that's their job. That's what they signed up for. That's what they ran for. This has happened before. Democrats have left the state with different squabbles that they've had with the Republican majority. It solves nothing. Eventually the work gets done. It's just harder and more acrimonious. And rather than uniting around the things upon which we agree, they chose to take their ball and glove and go home. That is of no help at all.
Okay. The governor has now threatened to arrest some of these lawmakers here. Can he do that? Do you anticipate it getting to that point?
If I understand the situation correctly, that's why they left the state. His power of being able to compel people to show up on the floor of the House probably only exists within the boundaries of the state of Texas. In 2003, when they fled to Oklahoma and then New Mexico, that was the central thesis there, that they had to leave the boundaries of the state. But look, it's no way to solve their problems, and we all know that there were things in this last election whether you're Republican or Democrat, there were things in this last election that you can't have been happy with. Good on the states for tackling the problems. That's what the Constitution says should happen. The states should make those laws, not the federal government, which Nancy Pelosi is trying to do. That would be the bigger problem if the federal government said, "Hey, we don't like the way you're running things in your state. We're going to run it for you." That would be the problem.
And we know Democrats have voiced their support for H.R. 1, which does aim to get the federal government involved in these state and local elections here. We're going to keep a close eye on what's happening in Texas. It's a fascinating story, and we'll talk about it throughout the program. But that is our time today with Congressman Michael Burgess of Texas. Congressman, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.